Last way that we protect this central nervous system is the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so before I really talk about the blood-brain barrier, I just want to kind of set the stage here. So looking here at this diagram, what you're looking at is basically a picture of the vasculature, the blood supply to the brain. Okay, so you can see that there's a lot of blood vessels leading to the brain here. Okay, the brain uses 15 to 20% of the body's blood supply. Um, and a lot of that actually is for the oxygen, which is used for the energy to power the sodium potassium ATPase, as you'll see. So anyway, main point here is the brain like uses up a lot of energy. So it needs a lot of blood, okay? So blood is good because it brings oxygen, but it can also bring a lot of other junk that you don't want, right? So it's carrying waste products from other parts of the body, toxins that you may have eaten with your food, all kinds of other stuff that you don't want, right? So we don't want that stuff getting to the brain. Okay, so how do we protect the brain from that? The way we protect the brain from that is using the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so what is the blood-brain barrier? Let's talk about that. So looking down at this figure right here, okay, what you're looking at is like a cross-section through blood vessels that are going into the brain. Okay, and what you'll notice, what I want to point out to you here is that the walls of the blood vessel are made up of these endothelial cells. Okay, so you can see that here's one cell right here. Okay, and then it ends, right? So you can see like right here, it's ending and we're starting another cell right here. Okay, this space between the endothelial cells that make up the wall of these capillaries is a place where harmful chemicals can potentially slip through the wall and come into the brain, okay? However, we prevent that from happening by using tight junctions, okay? So let's take a look at the next slide. I'm gonna remind you of like what tight junctions are, how they work, okay? So just to orient you here, what you have is you have one cell on the left, one cell on the right. They're forming an epithelium, okay? So we're basically forming a sheet of cells going horizontally across this slide, okay? We have one body compartment like kind of on the bottom and another body compartment on the top, okay? So since we're looking at the blood-brain barrier, you can basically think of it as the bottom being the inside of that blood vessel where the blood is. And then you can think of the top as being the brain, right? So we have blood coming to this area and things coming from the blood diffusing over or moving over in other ways to the brain up here, okay? Where these two epithelial cells meet, we have these structures called tight junctions, okay? I think you probably learned about tight junctions in another class, but maybe not. And anyway, you probably need a reminder. So the way tight junctions work is they form these like little blockades in this space between the two cells, right? So if you imagine that the tight junctions weren't here, then molecules would be able to easily move from one body compartment, so like the blood in this case, just through this space between the two cells and up to the brain, okay? But if we don't want that to happen, which is what we don't want to do with the brain because we want to protect it, what we can do is we can have these tight junctions here, okay? Tight junctions, like the tightness of tight junctions can be regulated, okay? So it can be easier or harder for molecules to make it through this space. We call this the paracellular pathway, like going around the cells, okay? And in the case of the brain, the tight junctions are very tight, okay? So going back to the previous slide, right, we have these tight junctions being formed in these spaces between the cells that make up the wall of the capillary, okay? If a molecule wants to move from the bloodstream to the brain, it can't just do that by going in between the two cells, okay? Because that space is like blocked off by tight junctions, okay? Instead, what it has to do is it has to move through the cell that makes up the wall of the capillary. And that's a lot harder to do because in order to move through the cell of the endothelial cell of the capillary wall, that cell has to have like transporters or channels or something that's going to allow that particular molecule to move through, right? So it's very highly regulated. Not just anything can move through. So it's kind of like this cell is acting as like sort of a bouncer, right? It's like checking your ID. Are you okay to go into the brain? Yes, then you can go through. If not, you get to stay in the blood, okay? So that's basically how the blood-brain barrier works. It's basically this series of tight junctions that lie between these endothelial cells in that space between them, okay? The tight junctions are formed by secretions from these glial cells called astrocytes, okay? So the astrocytes are going to secrete paracrines that then tell these cells to form those tight junctions, okay? So that's basically how the brain like prevents like junk from entering it, okay? Incidentally, I just want to mention the blood-brain barrier is a big problem for drug delivery. So, you know, there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies developing all kinds of drugs that target the brain for various diseases and so on, right? One big problem is getting past this blood-brain barrier, right? So it's easy enough to get drugs into the bloodstream, but it's hard to get that drug from the bloodstream past the blood-brain barrier into the brain. So that's kind of like a big issue in drug development.